The desert doesn't kill you with heat. It kills you with hope. It lets you think the shimmer on the horizon is water, just long enough to walk you into your grave. But for Julian Thorne, the grave was already dug. He was a man with a price on his head and a bullet in his side, left for the buzzards in the heart of the Dragoon Mountains. He expected death. What he found was something far more terrifying and far more seductive. He wasn't saved by a chaotic twist of fate. He was claimed, plucked from the dirt by a woman who didn't want his money or his gun. She wanted his bloodline. This isn't a fairy tale. This is the brutal, true account of how a broken outlaw became the last hope for a dying nation. The year was 1883. The Arizona Territory was less a geography and more of a furnace designed to burn the sin out of men. Julian Thorne had plenty of sin to burn, but he was running out of fuel. Julian stumbled, his left boot catching on a hidden root of mesquite. He didn't catch himself. He hit the hard-packed earth with the wet thud of dead weight. The dust puffed up, coating his cracked lips, tasting of iron and age. He lay there, the sun hammering against the back of his neck like a blacksmith's anvil. "Get up, Thorne," he told himself. "Marshal Graves is a day behind. Maybe less." But his legs refused. The bullet wound in his flank, a parting gift from a botched card game in Tombstone involving a man named Chester and a sleeve full of aces, had stopped bleeding hours ago. Now it just burned, a slow septic fire spreading into his gut. He rolled onto his back, wincing as the Winchester rifle strapped to his back dug into his spine. He stared up at the sky. It was a cruel, perfect blue. He checked the cylinder of his Colt Peacemaker. 2 rounds, 1 for Graves, 1 for himself. "Pathetic," he rasped, his voice sounding like 2 stones grinding together. The hallucinations had started an hour ago. He'd seen his father standing by a cactus, holding a glass of iced lemonade. He'd seen the woman he left in St. Louis, crying black tears. Now he saw a silhouette. It stood atop the ridge, backlit by the blinding sun. A rider. Julian fumbled for the Colt. His thumb slipped on the hammer. The silhouette didn't move. It wasn't Graves. The shape was different, lighter, blended with the horse, as if they were cast from the same bronze statue. The rider descended the slope, the horse picking its way through the scree with unnatural silence. As the figure grew closer, the details sharpened. It wasn't a soldier. It wasn't a lawman. It was an Apache warrior. But the attire was strange. A calico shirt, dusty and faded, tucked into buckskin leggings. A repeating rifle resting casually across the saddle horn. Julian managed to lift the pistol, the barrel wavering in the heat haze. "Back off," he wheezed. The rider stopped 10 feet away. Julian squinted. It wasn't a man. The woman sat atop a paint horse that looked as mean as a rattlesnake. She was older than the girls in the saloons, her face a map of sharp angles and sun-hardened skin, framed by hair blacker than a mine shaft. Her eyes were dark, intelligent, and utterly devoid of pity. She looked at Julian, not like a human being, but like a horse trader inspecting a lame mare. She said something in a language that sounded like wind rushing through a canyon. Then she switched to English. Her accent was thick, clipped, but perfectly understandable. "You have lost a lot of water," she said. It wasn't a question. "Go away," Julian groaned, his arm shaking. "The man with the silver star is tracking you," she said calmly. "He camps at the Iron Springs. He will be here by sundown." Julian dropped the gun. He didn't have the strength to hold it. "Then let him come." The woman dismounted. She moved with a fluid, predatory grace. She walked over to him, ignoring the pistol in the dust, and knelt. Up close, He smelled sage, horse sweat, and gunpowder. She grabbed his chin, forcing his head to the side to inspect his eyes, then tore open his shirt to look at the wound. Infected, she noted, but the bone is whole. Who are you? I am the one deciding if you are worth the water it will take to keep you alive. She stood up, towering over him. She looked at his shoulders, the breadth of his chest, the height of his frame. It was an invasive, calculating stare. You are Julian Thorne, she said, the surveyor who killed the banker in Prescott. Julian laughed, a dry, hacking sound. Self-defense, and it was a card cheat, not a banker. It does not matter what you call him. It matters that you are strong, and you have nowhere to go. She whistled. 2 other riders appeared from the brush, young men, armed with carbines, their faces painted with white clay. Load him, she ordered. I didn't agree to this, Julian mumbled as darkness began to encroach on his vision. The woman leaned down, her face inches from his. You are dead, Julian Thorne. The vultures have claimed you. I am simply stealing their meal. The last thing he felt was rough hands hoisting him onto a horse, and the jarring rhythm of a gallop that would carry him out of the white man's world and into something far older. Waking up was a violent process. It started with the sting of alcohol on raw flesh. Julian screamed, his back arching off the buffalo robes. A heavy hand pressed him down. "Hold him, Victor," a voice commanded. Julian blinked the grit from his eyes. He was inside a wickiup, the domed structure filtered with dappled sunlight coming through the brush and canvas roof. The air was thick with smoke and the smell of roasting meat. The woman from the desert, the matriarch, was cleaning his side with a rag soaked in what smelled like cheap whiskey and herbal poultice. A young warrior, broad-shouldered with a scar running through his eyebrow, held Julian's shoulders pinned to the ground. This must be Victor. "Easy, white man," Victor sneered, "or I let her use the knife." "Enough," the woman said. She tied a bandage around Julian's waist with practiced efficiency. "He needs his strength." Julian fell back, panting. "Where am I?" "You are in the stronghold," the woman said, wiping her hands on a cloth. "Deep in the dragoons. No marshal will ride here. Not if he wants to keep his scalp." Julian struggled to sit up. He was weak, but the fever that had been cooking his brain seemed to have broken. "Why? Why save me?" The woman sat cross-legged across from him. She gestured for Victor to leave. The warrior hesitated, glaring at Julian, before ducking out of the low entrance. "My name is Katerina," she said. "That is the name your people gave me when I was a scout for the army, years ago, before the betrayals." "You were a scout?" Julian asked, surprised. "I was many things, a wife, a mother, a warrior. Now I am the head of this band. We are the ones who refuse the reservation, the ones who refuse to die in the dust of San Carlos." Julian rubbed his face. "Look, Katerina, I'm grateful, but I have nothing to pay you with. My horse is dead. My money is gone. I do not want your money." Katerina reached behind her and pulled out a leather satchel. She tossed it to him. It was his own bag. Inside were his surveyor's journals, his maps, and his compass. "You are an educated man," she said. "You know the land. You know the law of the Americans." "I was a geologist before the whiskey took over," Julian corrected. "What does that matter?" Katerina leaned forward, her dark eyes locking onto his. The intensity in them was terrifying. "My tribe is dying, Julian Thorne. Not from bullets, but from time. Our men. Many were killed in the last raid by General Crook. Those who remain are young or old. The bloodline is thinning." Julian went cold. He had heard stories, wild, vulgar stories in saloons about captives. He shifted uncomfortably. If you're looking for someone to join the tribe, I'm not. Be silent, she snapped. Do not flatter yourself. I do not need a lover. I need a father. Julian stared at her. I don't understand. My daughter, Katerina said, her voice softening just a fraction. She is the future of this band. She is strong. She is fierce. But she has no mate. The men here, they are her cousins, her brothers by clan. We cannot marry within, and the other bands are scattered or imprisoned. She paused, letting the weight of the situation settle. I watched you in the desert, she continued. I have watched you for 3 days before you fell. You fight hard. You do not give up. You have the features of a survivor. I want you to give my daughter a child. Julian laughed, a nervous, incredulous sound. You want me to be a stud horse? Lady, you've got the wrong man. I'm a drifter, a killer according to the law. Exactly, Katerina said. You are outside the law. You belong to no one. That makes you mine. And if I refuse, Katerina didn't blink, then I will give you your gun back, with 1 bullet, and I will put you back where I found you. Marshal Graves is still tracking. He is very persistent. It wasn't a threat. It was a transaction. Life for service. Who is she? Julian asked, his throat dry. Her name is Lozan, named after the great warrior woman, and she will not be easy to please. You must not only provide the bloodline, Julian, you must earn her respect. If she kills you, I cannot stop her. Julian looked at the flap of the wiki-up. Outside, he could hear the sounds of the camp, children playing, horses whinnying. Life. Inside, he felt the walls closing in. I need time to think, Julian said. You have until sundown, Katerina replied, standing up. Tonight we eat. Tomorrow we decide if you live as a guest or die as a stranger. Julian emerged from the wiki-up an hour before sunset. The camp was tucked into a box canyon, invisible from the valley floor below. High walls of red granite protected them on 3 sides. It was a fortress of nature. He saw Victor by the fire, sharpening a knife. The young warrior watched Julian with open hostility. Julian ignored him, scanning the camp for the daughter. He saw women weaving baskets, men tending to horses, and then he saw her. She was by the stream that fed the canyon, washing a buckskin tunic. She was younger than Katerina, perhaps 20. She wore her hair in 2 long braids. She wasn't delicate. Her arms were toned, defined by years of drawing a bow and riding hard. She looked up, sensing his gaze. Her eyes were lighter than her mother's, hazel, perhaps from a mixed ancestor long ago. She didn't look away. She stared right through him. This was Lozan. Julian walked toward her. He needed to gauge what he was walking into. You're the one, he said, stopping a few feet away. Lozan wrung out the tunic, water splashing on the red rocks. My mother has strange ideas, she said. Her English was better than Katerina's, flawless, almost academic. You speak well, Julian noted. Mission school, she said with a sneer. Before I ran away, they taught me to read the Bible and scrub floors. I prefer the desert. Your mother says she has a proposition. Lozan stood up. She was tall, nearly reaching Julian's chin. My mother sees the world ending. She thinks mixing the blood will save us. She thinks a white father will give the child legitimacy. Legitimacy? Julian frowned. To who? The Apache don't care about white legitimacy. Lozan stepped closer, lowering her voice. This isn't about biology, white man. It's about land. This was the twist. Julian felt the surveyor in him wake up. Explain. Lozan looked over her shoulder to make sure Katerina wasn't listening. My mother holds a piece of paper. An old Spanish land grant, given to her grandfather by the Mexican government 50 years ago. It covers this canyon, the water, the gold in the lower creek. Julian's eyes widened. A Sangre de Cristo grant. Those are worth millions if verified. But, Lawson continued, the American court in Tucson will not recognize a deed held by an hostile Apache woman. They will burn it. But if the heir is born of a white father, if the land is held in trust by a white man who is legally married to the mother, Julian whistled low. The homestead loop. She doesn't just want a baby. She wants a legal shield. She wants a ghost, Lawson said bitterly. A white man who will sign the papers, breed the heir, and then stay out of the way. She thinks you are desperate enough to do it. And what do you think? Julian asked. Lawson's hand moved so fast he didn't see it. Suddenly, a small knife was pressed against his stomach. I think, she whispered, that if you betray us, if you try to sell this land or run to the marshal, I will peel the skin from your skull while you are still screaming. Julian didn't flinch. He looked down at the knife, then back at her eyes. I'm tired of running, Lawson, and I'm tired of being poor. If this land is real, and if you can keep graves off my back, maybe we can make a deal. But I'm not a stud horse. If we do this, we do it my way. Lawson studied him. She saw the fear, yes, but she also saw a calculation. He wasn't a coward. She sheathed the knife. Tonight is the council. My mother will announce the union. Victor will challenge you. He wants to be the war chief. He wants me. If you cannot beat him, you are useless to us. I'm injured, Julian said. I can't fight a brave in hand-to-hand. Then you better use that surveyor's brain of yours, Lawson said, picking up her basket, because Victor fights with his heart, and his heart is full of hate. As she walked away, Julian looked up at the canyon walls. He was trapped. To the south, a marshal who wanted to hang him. Here, a warrior who wanted to gut him. And in the middle, a matriarch playing a high-stakes game of legal chess with his life. He checked his pocket. He still had his compass, but a compass couldn't tell you how to navigate a world that had gone completely mad. He limped back toward the fire. He needed a weapon. Not a gun. Katerina had taken those. He needed something else. He looked at the surveyor's bag. Inside was a small glass vial of mercury, used for leveling instruments. A plan began to form. It was dirty. It was dangerous. It was exactly the kind of thing a desperate man would do. Night fell like a heavy woolen blanket over the Dragoon Mountains, sealing the canyon in suffocating darkness, punctuated only by the large communal fire crackling in the center of the camp. The air grew cold, sharp, and thin. Julian sat by the fire, the heat soothing the persistent throb in his side. The Apache families formed a wide circle around the flames, their faces illuminated in flickering orange and deep shadow. They were silent, their eyes fixed on the space between the fire and the darkness. It was a theater, and Julian knew he was the main attraction. Katerina stood at the head of the circle. She wore a heavy woolen blanket over her shoulders, and in the firelight she looked ancient and formidable, a spirit carved from the mountain itself. "Tonight," her voice rang out, echoing slightly off the canyon walls, "we decide the future of this band. The blood has grown thin. The spirits demand new strength." She gestured to Lawson, who stood beside her, arms crossed, her expression unreadable. "My daughter requires a mate. One who can walk in both worlds. One who can fight the white man with his own laws." Katerina turned her gaze to Julian. "This man, this Julian Thorne, claims this right." A low murmur rippled through the crowd. Then Victor stepped into the light. He had stripped to his waist, his chest painted with jagged stripes of white clay. He was younger than Julian by 10 years, perhaps, but he was coiled muscle and raw aggression. He held no weapons, only his clenched fists. His eyes were black pits of hatred directed solely at the interloper. "He is carrion!" Victor shouted, spitting on the ground near Julian's boots. "He is weak, a wounded dog the matriarch picked up. He is not fit to touch Lozen. He is not fit to breathe our air." Victor turned to Katerina. "Let me finish what the desert started. I will break him, and we will find another way." Katerina looked at Julian. "The challenge is given. Do you accept, white man, or do you walk out into the dark, right now, with nothing?" Julian slowly stood up. His left side screamed in protest. He was stiff, tired, and utterly outmatched in a fair fight. Good thing he had no intention of fighting fair. He kept his right hand shoved deep into his jacket pocket, his fingers curled tightly around the cold glass vial of mercury he'd stolen from his surveyor's kit. "I accept," Julian said. His voice was quieter than Victor's, but it carried. The circle widened. The spectators pushed back, creating a ring of packed earth illuminated by the dancing flames. Victor didn't wait for a signal. He roared, launching himself across the gap with terrifying speed. Julian barely had time to brace himself. He sidestepped, but not fast enough. Victor's shoulder slammed into Julian's injured side. Julian cried out, white light exploding behind his eyes as he hit the dirt. The pain was blinding. He rolled, tasting dust and blood, just as Victor's foot stomped down where his head had been a second before. "Get up, dog!" Victor taunted, circling him. Julian scrambled to his knees, gasping for air. He couldn't take another hit like that. He needed Victor closer. He needed him confident. He swayed on his feet, feigning more weakness than he felt. He let his left arm hang uselessly. Victor grinned, sensing an easy kill. The young warrior stalked in, winding up for a crushing blow to Julian's jaw. Now. As Victor lunged, Julian didn't retreat. He stepped in. He whipped his right hand out of his pocket, smashing the glass vial against the hard leather of Victor's bandolier. The glass shattered. Julian raked his hand upward in a savage arc, throwing the contents directly into Victor's face, just as the warrior passed close to the fire. The mercury, heavy and liquid silver, caught the intense light of the flames. It didn't burn like acid, but it was heavy, foreign, and dense. It splashed into Victor's eyes and nose, a shocking, shimmering cloud that instantly disoriented him. Victor howled, stumbling back, clawing at his face as the heavy metal coated his vision in a terrifying, reflective sheen. He was momentarily blinded, panicked by the unknown substance. It was the only opening Julian would get. Ignoring the screaming pain in his own body, Julian drove his shoulder into Victor's midsection, doubling the warrior over. As Victor gasped, Julian brought his knee up with every ounce of remaining strength, connecting squarely with Victor's nose with a sickening crunch. Victor reeled backward, blood pouring over the shimmering mercury on his face. He tripped over his own feet and crashed into the dust near the fire. He tried to rise, dazed, sputtering, but Julian was already there. Julian snatched a heavy piece of firewood, a thick branch of ironwood, from the edge of the fire pit. He raised the club high. Victor looked up, his eyes swimming, seeing death through a metallic haze. Julian hesitated. The camp was deadly silent. He could end it here. He could crush Victor's skull and secure his place through sheer terror. Then he caught Lozen's eye across the fire. She wasn't looking at him with admiration. She was looking at him with cold assessment. Killing Victor would make an enemy of half the camp. Julian lowered the club slowly. He tossed it into the fire, sending up a shower of sparks. He stood over Victor, chest heaving. "It's over," Julian rasped. Victor glared up at him, humiliated, broken not by strength, but by a trick. He spat blood, then turned his head away, refusing to look at the white man who had bested him. Katerina stepped into the silence. She looked at the shattered glass and the silver sheen on the ground, then at Julian. A ghost of a smile touched her lips. "The desert teaches harsh lessons," Katerina announced. "The coyote survives where the mountain lion starves because the coyote is clever." She walked over and took Julian's hand, raising it in the air. The gesture felt alien, bizarre. The challenge is met. Julian Thorne is the father. No one cheered. The tension in the air simply shifted from immediate violence to a simmering, resentful acceptance. Victor's friends helped him up and dragged him away into the shadows. Lozan walked toward Julian. She stopped a foot away, smelling of wood smoke and cold night air. Up close, her beauty was severe, intimidating. "You fight like a coward," she stated, her voice flat. "I fight to win," Julian countered, wiping blood from his split lip. "I'm still standing. That's all that matters out here." "You embarrassed a proud man," Lozan said. "Victor will not forget this. You have bought yourself time, white man. But do not think you have bought safety." She turned on her heel and walked toward her mother's wickiup. Katerina approached him, handing him a small gourd of water. "Drink." "You did well. Better than I expected." "I fight dirty," Julian said, taking a long pull of the water. "The Americans fight dirty," Katerina replied bitterly. "They sign treaties with one hand and steal land with the other. We need dirty fighters if we are to survive." She looked toward the entrance of the canyon, where the moon was just cresting the ridge. "Rest now, Julian Thorne. Tomorrow, we stop playing games. Tomorrow, we secure the future." 3 days passed. Julian's wounds began to scab over, the fever receding into a dull ache. His status in the camp was strange. He was no longer a prisoner, yet not quite a guest. He was a necessary evil. The eyes of the tribe followed him everywhere, especially Victor's kin, who watched him with open malice. Lozan ignored him completely. She went on hunting parties, returning with deer or wild turkey, moving through the camp like a solitary storm cloud. The union Katerina spoke of seemed purely theoretical. On the morning of the 4th day, Katerina found Julian repairing a stirrup leather near the horse corral. "Come," she said, "bring your tools." She led him away from the main camp, up a narrow, winding goat path etched into the red granite cliff face. They climbed for 20 minutes, higher than Julian had been before. The view was staggering, a sprawling ocean of jagged peaks and arroyos stretching all the way to Mexico. They reached a shallow cave, hidden by an overhang and thick brush. Katerina went inside and retrieved a heavy, oilskin-wrapped bundle from a cleft in the rock. She sat on a flat stone at the cave's mouth and unwrapped it with reverence. Inside was a thick tube of vellum. She unrolled it carefully. The parchment was old, cracked, and stained yellow with age, smelling of dust and history. It was a map. Julian leaned in, his professional instincts taking over. It was drawn in old iron gall ink, the script flowering Spanish calligraphy. It was dated 1838. The seal of the Mexican Republic was stamped in red wax at the bottom, alongside the signature of Governor Manuel Armijo of Santa Fe. "The Sangre de Cristo grant," Katerina said softly, "given to my grandfather for service against the Comanche, before the Americans came, before the Treaty of Guadalupe Hidalgo promised to respect our property." Julian ran his fingers over the vellum. He recognized the landmarks immediately. The twin peaks to the east, the winding ribbon of the San Pedro River, and there, in the center, the box canyon where they were currently hiding, marked as the heart of the claim. "It's genuine," Julian breathed. He had seen forgeries in land offices, from Denver to Santa Fe. This was real. The American courts say an Apache cannot hold title, Katerina said, anger vibrating in her voice. They say we are wards of the state, not citizens. They say because we fight, we forfeit our rights. But if Lozan marries a white man, a man who can read their laws, then the claim becomes his, Julian finished, held in trust. And since the grant predates the American takeover, it supersedes standard homestead laws. He looked up at her. It's a brilliant, desperate plan, Katerina. But it only works if the courts in Tucson aren't completely corrupt. Which they are. There is more, Katerina said. She pointed to a faint pencil line drawn across the southern section of the map, cutting right through the widest part of the valley below their canyon. What is this? Julian asked. 2 moons ago, before the soldiers came, I saw white men with instruments like yours. Down in the valley. They were putting wooden stakes in the ground along this line. Julian went cold. He grabbed the map, holding it up to the light. He traced the line, his mind racing through the geography of the territory, the southern route. For years, rumors had swirled in the surveying camps and saloons about the Southern Pacific Railroad. They were desperate for a route to the west coast that avoided the brutal inclines of the northern passes, something that could handle heavy freight year-round without snow blockages. He looked at the map, then out at the reality of the landscape below. The valley protected by this grant was the only natural corridor through the dragoons that was flat enough for a rail grade. My God, Julian whispered. The realization hit him like a physical blow. This wasn't just a piece of land for grazing horses or hiding from the army. If the railroad was coming through here, this piece of parchment was worth everything. The rights of way alone would be worth hundreds of thousands of dollars, maybe millions in gold bonds. He looked at Katerina. Her dark eyes were watching him, gauging his reaction to the gold fever she knew would rise in his blood. You knew, Julian accused. You didn't just pick me for Lozan. You picked me because I'm a surveyor. You needed someone to confirm what those stakes meant. I suspected, Katerina corrected. The white man does not measure rocks for fun. Where they measure, destruction follows, and money follows destruction. Julian stood up, pacing the small ledge. The scope of it was staggering. He was a wanted man with $50 to his name, standing on top of a fortune that could buy him a new life, a new name, anything he wanted. But it was also a death sentence. Katerina, do you have any idea what you're sitting on? The railroad barons, men like Huntington or Stanford, they won't let an old Spanish deed stop them. They'll burn the canyon down with everyone inside it to get this route. They'll hire an army of Pinkertons bigger than anything General Crook commands. They will try, Katerina said fiercely. But if the claim is legal, held by a white man, and filed in the courts, then they must negotiate. They must pay. And with that money, my people can buy land where we are safe. We can buy a future. She stood and faced him. Now you understand the bargain, Julian Thorne. It is not just about a baby. It is about a war for the soul of this territory. Are you with us? Or are you just another white man looking to steal what is ours? Julian looked at the map, then out at the harsh, beautiful land. He thought about the dingy saloons, the cheap whiskey, the constant looking over his shoulder. He thought about Marshall graves, creeping closer every day. He was trapped between a rock and a hard place, but for the first time in his life, the rock was made of solid gold. If we pull this off, Julian said slowly, his voice thick with greed and fear, I want half the buyout money from the railroad. Katerina didn't blink. Agreed. Half for you, half for the tribe. and you stay married to Lozan until the ink is dry and the money is in the bank in San Francisco. Deal, Julian said. They shook hands. Her grip was iron. It was a deal made in hell, perhaps, but it was the best shot either of them had. As they descended back toward the camp, the canyon didn't feel like a prison anymore. It felt like a bank vault, and Julian realized with a jolt that he was no longer just trying to survive. He was preparing to rob the biggest train in history before it was even built. The atmosphere in the camp changed the moment Julian and Katerina returned from the cave. Julian carried himself differently. The desperate slouch of the prisoner was gone, replaced by the calculating tension of a partner in a high-stakes game. He spent the next 2 days intensely focused. He used his recovered instruments, the brass compass, a small telescoping alidade, to begin verifying the boundary markers from the canyon floor. He needed to be certain the current geography matched the 50-year-old map. Lozan watched him from a distance, her skepticism slowly morphing into a grudging curiosity. He wasn't just sitting around waiting to be fed anymore. He was working, and his work had a manic intensity that matched her mother's. On the afternoon of the second day, Julian was down by the creek bed, knee-deep in water, checking a rock formation against the map, when a sharp, high-pitched whistle echoed from the canyon entrance. It was a scout signal. Trouble. The camp erupted into controlled chaos. Mothers grabbed children, moving them towards the deeper caves at the back of the canyon. Warriors grabbed rifles and cartridge belts, melting into the rocks and brush along the canyon walls. Julian stood frozen in the creek as Lozan appeared on the bank above him. She held a Winchester Yellow Boy rifle, her face grim. "Get up here," she commanded. Julian scrambled up the bank, water sloshing in his boots. "What is it? The army?" "Worse," Lozan spit. "The law dog, the one who hunts you." Julian's stomach dropped. Marshal Elias Graves. "How many?" "5 riders, heavily armed. They are at the mouth of the canyon. They found the hidden trail." They hurried back to the center of the now empty camp. Katerina was there, standing by the dead fire, holding an old, heavy Sharps buffalo rifle. "He is here for you," Katerina said to Julian. Her voice was calm, but her eyes were hard. "I need to hide," Julian said, looking toward the caves. "No," Katerina said sharply. "If you hide, they will tear this camp apart looking for you. They will kill my people. You brought this storm here, Julian. You must face it." Julian looked at the 2 women. He realized with terrifying clarity that this was the real test. The duel with Victor had been theater. This was life or death. "If I go out there," Julian said, "Graves will hang me. He doesn't care about land grants." "Then do not let him take you," Lozan said. Katerina reached behind a stack of supplies and pulled out Julian's own Winchester rifle and his Colt Peacemaker, the belt draped over it. She tossed them to him. He caught the weapons, the familiar weight of the oiled wood and cold steel settling into his hands. It felt like an old friend returning. "There are 5 of them," Katerina said. "We have 20 warriors in the rocks above them right now. If they try to enter, they die." "Graves won't just ride in," Julian said, strapping on the gun belt. "He's too smart for that. He'll want to talk first." "Then we talk," Katerina said. The 3 of them walked toward the narrow entrance of the box canyon, a natural choke point flanked by towering red walls. They stopped 50 yards from the opening. Through the shimmering heat haze, Julian could see them. 5 riders sitting on tired horses, just beyond the canyon's threshold. In the lead was Marshal Elias Graves. He was a tall man, lean as a rake, wearing a dust-coated black duster and a flat-brimmed hat pulled low. Even at this distance, Julian could feel the man's relentless, icy stare. He was known throughout the territory not for his speed with a gun, but for his terrifying patience. He was a man who treated man-hunting like accounting. He always balanced the books. Graves rode forward slowly, stopping just inside the canyon entrance. His deputies hung back, hands nervously hovering near their holsters. They knew they were in a kill box, surrounded by unseen Apache rifles. "Ho the camp!" Graves called out. His voice was dry, monotone, carrying easily in the rock amphitheater. Katerina stepped forward. "You have no business here, lawman. This is Apache land." Graves ignored her, his eyes locking onto Julian. "Afternoon, Mr. Thorne," Graves called, as politely as if meeting on a Sunday street in Tucson. "You look better than the last time I saw your trail. Must be the company you're keeping." "Marshal," Julian acknowledged, his hand resting on his colt. "You came a long way for nothing." "Oh, I wouldn't say nothing," Graves said, reaching into his saddlebag and pulling out a folded paper. "I have a warrant here for Julian Thorne, wanted for the murder of banker Josiah Reed in Prescott. Dead or alive. The territory prefers alive, but I'm partial to dead. Saves on paperwork." "It was self-defense, Elias," Julian shouted back. "He drew on me over a poker game." "The law says otherwise. Now step on out here, boy. Don't make these people bleed for your sins." "He is under my protection," Katerina declared, stepping in front of Julian. Graves sighed, a long, weary sound. He looked up at the canyon rims, knowing full well he was being watched by 20 rifle sights. "Mom," Graves said, "you are harboring a fugitive. That makes you an accessory. I have no quarrel with your people today. Give me the white man, and we ride away." "He is not just a white man," Katerina yelled back. "He is family. He is betrothed to my daughter. He is of this tribe now." Graves actually laughed, a short, sharp bark. "Family? Thorne? He'd sell his own mother for a bottle of rye. You're making a mistake, Katerina. A deadly one." Graves slowly pulled his own rifle from its scabbard, a shining new Winchester 1876. "Last chance, Thorne," Graves called out. "Walk out or we come in, and if we come in, the army follows tomorrow." Julian looked at Lozan beside him. She had her rifle raised, cheek pressed to the stock, aimed squarely at Graves's chest. She wasn't looking at Julian for confirmation. She was ready to kill for this canyon, for the future. Julian thought about the map in the cave, the millions of dollars, the chance to stop running. If he walked out now, he would hang in Prescott within the week. If he stayed, he was declaring war on the United States government. There really wasn't a choice at all. Julian levered around into the chamber of his Winchester. The metallic clack-clack echoed loudly in the silence. "I like it here, Marshal," Julian yelled. "I think I'll stay." Graves nodded slowly, as if expecting this exact outcome. "Have it your way, son." The Marshal spurred his horse suddenly, wheeling it around to retreat behind a large boulder just outside the entrance. At the same instant, his 4 deputies opened fire. Bullets whipped through the air. One kicked up dirt at Julian's feet. Another whined off the rock wall inches from Katerina's head. "Down!" Julian tackled Katerina, shoving her behind a low outcrop of rock as Lozan dropped to one knee and returned fire, her rifle booming like a cannon in the confined space. From the cliffs above, the Apache warriors opened up. A fusillade of lead rained down on the entrance. One of the deputies screamed as his horse went down, throwing him into the open. "Hold your fire!" Katerina screamed at the cliffs in Apache. "Do not kill the lawmen! Just drive them back!" She knew that killing a U.S. Marshal would bring down a wrath they couldn't survive. The firing from above, slackened to sporadic shots, meant to pin the deputies down. Julian peered over the rock. The deputies were scrambling for cover outside the canyon. Graves was invisible behind his boulder, pumping steady, disciplined fire toward their position. A slug slammed into the rock, right in front of Julian's face, sending sharp granite splinters into his cheek. He flinched, swearing. He looked at Lozan. She was reloading, calm amidst the chaos. She looked at him, her eyes fierce and alive. "Welcome to the family, white man," she yelled over the gunfire. Julian raised his rifle, lined up his sights on the edge of the boulder where Graves was hiding, and squeezed the trigger. The recoil slammed into his shoulder. He was done running. He was fighting now, and God help anyone who got between him and that gold. The gunfire had ceased, but the silence that filled the Dragoon Canyon was heavier than the lead that had been flying an hour before. The sun had dipped below the rim, painting the red rocks in shades of bruised purple and charcoal. Inside the wickiup, the air was thick with the smell of sage and desperation. Katerina sat by the small fire, the ancient map resting on her knees like a holy relic. Julian paced the dirt floor, the adrenaline of the shootout fading into a cold, gnawing dread. Outside, Marshal Graves and his men were camped at the choke point. They wouldn't attack again tonight. They didn't have to. They just had to wait for the water to run dry, or the army to arrive with a mountain howitzer. "We cannot stay here," Lozan said, standing in the shadows of the entrance. She had washed the war paint from her face, revealing a fatigue that went bone deep. "Graves has sent a rider back to Tombstone. He is calling for the cavalry. By the day after tomorrow, this canyon will be a slaughterhouse." Katerina smoothed the vellum map. "Then we must be in Tucson before the sun rises on that second day." Julian stopped pacing. "Tucson is 60 miles of hard riding, and we have to get past Graves to even start." "We do not all go," Katerina said, her voice steel-hard. "Just you and Lozan." She reached into a wooden chest and pulled out a heavy, leather-bound Bible. It was battered, the spine broken, a relic from the mission school. "To file this claim," Katerina said, "you must be man and wife, legally, in the eyes of God and the territory. We do it now." Julian looked at Lozan. There was no romance in her eyes, only a fierce, sacrificial duty. She stepped into the firelight. "I do not love you, white man," she whispered, so only he could hear. "But I love this land. Do not make me regret this." The ceremony was brief, stark, and utterly devoid of joy. Katerina read the verses in a mix of Latin and Apache. There were no rings. Instead, Katerina took a knife and made a shallow cut on Julian's palm, then on Lozan's. She pressed their hands together. "Blood for blood," Katerina intoned. "Land for land. By the power of the spirits and the laws of the occupied territory, you are bound." It was done. Julian Thorne, the drifter and killer, was now the husband of an Apache princess and the claimant to 50,000 acres of prime territory. "Now go," Katerina commanded. "Victor will clear the path." The escape was a gamble on a suicide maneuver. At midnight, Victor and 3 other warriors rode toward the canyon entrance, screaming war cries and firing rifles into the air. They dragged bundles of burning brush behind their horses, kicking up a massive cloud of dust and smoke that glowed hellish orange in the moonlight. Graves and his deputies panicked, firing blindly into the swirling confusion, convinced the entire tribe was charging. In the chaos, Julian and Lozan, dressed in dark ponchos and riding horses with hooves wrapped in burlap to muffle the sound, slipped up the goat path Katerina had shown Julian days ago. It was a terrifying climb in the dark. One slip meant a 1,000-foot drop. They crested the ridge just as the shooting below died down. Julian looked back. The flashes of gunfire were tiny sparks in the vast blackness. He saw Victor's horse turn back toward the safety of the rocks. They had made it. "Ride," Lozan ordered. "We do not stop until we see the Santa Cruz River." They rode like ghosts across the basin. They bypassed Benson, skirted the patrols near Pantano Wash, and pushed their horses to the breaking point. Julian's wound throbbed in rhythm with the galloping hooves, a hot wire of pain searing his side. But he grit his teeth. They reached the outskirts of Tucson just after noon on the second day. The town was a sprawling mess of adobe and timber, dusty streets choked with freight wagons and the hum of commerce. It was the belly of the beast. They garnered stares as they rode down Congress Street. A white man, unshaven and bloody, riding alongside an Apache woman. Julian kept his hand near his Colt, his eyes scanning every face for a badge. They tied their horses in front of a brick building with a sign that read, "Thaddeus Holt, Attorney at Law and Land Agent." Julian knew Holt by reputation. He was a man who had been disbarred in Texas for bribery and run out of California for gambling. He was exactly the kind of lawyer they needed. They burst into the office. It smelled of stale cigar smoke and old paper. Thaddeus Holt, a corpulent man with a walrus mustache and a vest stained with mustard, looked up from his desk, startled. "We're closed," Holt grunted. Julian slammed the map onto the desk, followed by a heavy pouch of raw gold nuggets, Katerina's life savings, gathered from the creek over 20 years. "You're open," Julian rasped. "I need you to file a pre-treaty land patent. Sangre de Cristo grant, validated 1838. Holt's eyes widened as he saw the gold. He opened the map. His eyebrows shot up. This covers the entire southern pass. The railroad is surveying this next week." "I know," Julian said. "That's why you're going to file it today. Right now. Before the courthouse closes." Holt looked at Lozan, then back to Julian. "This is an Indian claim, son. The judge will use it to light his cigar." "Look at the marriage certificate," Julian said, slapping the piece of paper Katerina had written out on the desk. "She's my wife. The claim is transferred to me. Julian Thorne, U.S. citizen." Holt whistled low. "The spousal loophole. Dirty. I love it." He grabbed his coat. "Let's go. Judge French is at the courthouse, and he owes me a favor." The Pima County Courthouse was a fortress of bureaucracy. They moved through the hallways, Holt leading the way like a battering ram. They reached the clerk's office just as the clock on the wall struck 3. "File it," Holt barked at the clerk, a skinny man named Miller. "Docket 47, priority claim." The clerk stammered, looking at the dirty, desperate couple. "Mr. Holt, I can't just—" "The filing fee is included," Holt said, sliding 2 large gold nuggets across the counter. The clerk's stamp hovered over the paper. Thump. The sound was louder than a gunshot. It was the sound of history changing. "Done," Holt grinned. "Mr. Thorne, you are now the legal owner of the Dragoon Box Canyon. Anyone entering without your permission is trespassing, including the Southern Pacific Railroad." The door behind them burst open. "Julian Thorne!" Julian spun around. Marshal Graves stood in the doorway, dust-covered and furious. He had his Colt drawn. 2 deputies stood behind him. "You led me on a merry chase, boy," Graves snarled. "But the road ends here. Hands in the air. You're under arrest for murder." Lozan's hand went to the knife at her belt. Julian grabbed her wrist to stop her. "Easy, Marshal," Julian said, his voice surprisingly calm. He felt a strange, intoxicating power. It wasn't the whiskey, and it wasn't the fever. It was the law. "Step away from the desk," Graves commanded, cocking the hammer. "I can't do that, Elias," Julian said. He picked up the freshly stamped document. "You see, you're trying to arrest a man for a crime in Prescott, but that crime requires a witness. And your witness? The banker? He worked for the railroad, didn't he?" Graves's eyes narrowed. "What are you babbling about?" "I know why you've been dogging me so hard," Julian said, stepping closer to the gun. "It wasn't about justice. It was about clearing the board. The railroad hired you to clean up the loose ends before they seized the canyon. They knew about the Apaches. They wanted them gone." "That's a lie," Graves said, but his finger hesitated on the trigger. "Is it?" Thaddeus Holt stepped in, sensing the shift in power. "Marshal, look at this document. My client, Mr. Thorne, just filed a validated Mexican land grant. If you shoot him now, you aren't shooting a drifter. You're shooting one of the largest landowners in the Arizona Territory. And you're doing it in front of a court clerk and a member of the bar." Holt smiled, a shark-like grin. "If you pull that trigger, the federal investigation into your finances will be extensive." Graves looked at the lawyer, then at Julian. He looked at the stamped paper. He knew the game. He knew that money and land outweighed a badge every single time in the West. Slowly, agonizingly, Graves lowered the gun. "You think a piece of paper saves you?" Graves hissed. "The railroad will send men worse than me. They'll burn you out." "Let them come," Lozen spoke up for the first time. Her voice rang through the quiet office. "We have guns, and now we have your paper. We are not going anywhere." Graves holstered his weapon. He looked at Julian with a mixture of hatred and grudging respect. "Watch your back, Thorne. The desert is a big place." He turned and walked out, his spurs jingling in the silence. Julian let out a breath he felt he'd been holding for a month. He looked at Lozen. For the first time, the hardness in her face softened. She touched the document on the desk. "Is it true?" she asked. "Is the land ours?" "It's ours," Julian said. "Forever." The victory in the courthouse was only the beginning of the war, but it was the turning point. The Southern Pacific Railroad did not burn them out. Faced with a legal claim that could tie up their construction for a decade, they negotiated. Julian Thorne did not take the money and run. He stayed. He used the funds to build a ranch at the mouth of the canyon, a fortress that protected the tribe inside. He and Lozen remained married, a union that started as a lie and forged itself into a dynasty of iron and blood. They say on quiet nights in the Dragoons, you can still see the descendants of that union riding the ridges. They don't look like white men, and they don't look like Apaches. They look like survivors. And that, my friends, is the legend of Julian Thorne and the Apache Matriarch. A story about how the West wasn't just won with Winchester rifles, but with the stroke of a pen and the courage of two people from different worlds. It makes you wonder how many other empires were built on secrets like this. If you enjoyed this deep dive into the gritty, untold side of the Wild West, please smash that like button. It really helps the channel grow. And if you want more stories like this, subscribe and turn on notifications so you never miss an upload. What do you think happened to Victor? Did he ever forgive Julian? Tell me your theories in the comments below. Thanks for watching, and keep riding.